Alternate presidents, because why not? Scenario 1. What if Stephen A. Douglas became president? In 1860, he'd done the worst out of 4 candidates, only gaining Missouri and a bit of New Jersey. But what if he campaigned more against his former rival, Lincoln? Or maybe Lincoln decides not to run for president. Maybe he negotiates a deal with John Bell to drop out of the race to become Secretary of State as a united centrist on slavery ticket. What if President James Buchanan, to try and get nominated again, implements ranked choice voting, which would fail for him but make voting in America far more democratic? Or maybe people are just confused by 4 different people. So Stephen Douglas gets votes from basically the middle of the country. So Stephen Douglas becomes the first president from Vermont. He was nicknamed the Little Giant because he was only 5'4", tying with James Madison as the second shortest president. He was big on popular sovereignty to allow states to choose to be free or not. He passed the Homesteader Act to open up U.S. territories to settlers to give out land if you can improve it for 5 years. And because we did delay the Civil War, this means Southern California, who actually did vote to split off from the North, but with less chaos going on, this means SoCal can be its own state, named after the Colorado River. So this future state that wasn't even a territory at the time will eventually get the name Van Buren. Also, SoCal would be a slave state. A very unique state with Latin rancheros running everything, with a mix of southern aristocracy. And to keep the balance of power, Nevada would become the next state, sadly losing Battleborn as its motto and just being known as the Silver State. And Stephen Douglas would catch typhoid and die 8 weeks into the job. So Herschel Vespasian Johnson, the former governor of Georgia, becomes the next president. He was the first president with a beard and he owned 34 people. Congress at this point was basically on fire, unable to agree on most things, especially because the president is openly sympathetic towards secessionists. They had to bring out the mace they whack people with if they're being too disruptful, which they should use more. Nebraska becomes the next slave state and offset it with a free Van Buren state. Utah would try and apply to be a slave state, but the whole Mormon polygamy thing was seen as even more controversial. Johnson would try to either veto or repeal the Homesteader Act. Even if he's successful, news travels really slow at this time, so a lot of people would move out there, and bleeding Kansas situations and open conflict between settlers and also Native Americans, it's just this huge mess. So yeah, HVJ wouldn't have a ghost of a chance for a re-election. John Bell would try to rally Northern Democrats with the National Union vote again. But John C. Breckinridge would return with a big mustache and ready to actually secede with the Southern Democrats. Abraham Lincoln returns, more confident about abolition, with Schuyler Colfax as his running mate, who spells Schuyler like he's a Game of Thrones character. But no matter how much John Bell wants to kick the can down the road, we're going to have the slavery discussion now, thus starting the U.S. Civil War. Colorado would attempt to join the Confederates, but its small population is overwhelmed by federal troops, similar to Maryland or Missouri. In real life, Johnson was a member of the Confederate Senate, so maybe like John Tyler, he would become a traitor, or maybe he'll just retire from politics after that. Lincoln will go the way of Lincoln and get replaced by either Schuyler or Andrew Johnson, not related, I think. But even if Schuyler does get to become president, he'll still kind of have the problems of being associated with bribes from the railroad industry and probably gets manipulated by anti-Reconstruction Southerners. And so Stephen Douglas will become a guy who was president and probably remembered in cartoons for being very short. There'll probably also be a bunch of alternate historians be like, if only he survived, and honestly, if he did, it would probably still end up the same. There's only so much they can kick the slavery can down the road. His biggest legacy being the state of Colorado. So SoCal has its own state, and no matter what, because of just how prime the real estate is in Southern California, despite its origins, it will become the Southern California we know today. Love it or hate it. Probably also more associated with offshore oil drilling. So all the Northern California people are excited because they don't have to constantly pay for LA. So California becomes more dominated by San Francisco and the wine vineyards, with a culture more similar to Oregon, and it would probably be a conservative state for a long time, but eventually in modern time become a swing state. Scenario 2. What if Michael Dukakis didn't fumble an 18-point lead? For the 88 election, maybe he didn't take a photo of him with a giant helmet with his name neatly written on it, where you can see his suit and tie under the uniform, and a big silly face. Maybe the Willie Horton ad actually hurts Bush more and gets rightfully seen as just downright racist. Maybe Bernard Shaw doesn't do the third debate, and Dukakis hammers Bush more on the Iran-Contra affair. So it's really not that impossible to see him squeeze by a little. So Michael Dukakis beats Spiro Agnew as the most important Greek American, becoming the first Greek Orthodox president, and his family descends from the Isle of Lesbos, and yes, that's where they get their name from. So being an Anatolian Greek from the east of the Aegean Sea, that means Michael Dukakis, by definition, is also the first Asian American president. Dukakis would be all about expanding healthcare, immigration, and green energy. He'd try to expand rehabilitation rather than imprisonment, but probably fail. He would be president during the fall of the Soviet Union, triumphing liberal democracies beating communism, and sending aid to former Soviet countries. There's no war in Iraq and more of a UN blockade, but maybe something in Panama to make him not look weak. NAFTA is signed earlier. The Americans with Disability Act is signed earlier. But the recession of 1990 would still hit, and Dukakis would be slow to respond. Plus, looking weak foreignly would lead to him losing re-election to Jack Kemp, who will use that money to go to war with Iraq, and then lose to Bill Clinton in 96. Dukakis would be mostly forgotten other than his pretty unique name, but a lot of historians would appreciate his fight for disability rights and green energy. Scenario 3, a big one. Al Gore really should have been president, but he kept making the wrong decisions and surrounding himself with the wrong people. He didn't want to campaign with Bill Clinton, despite at the time being very popular, because he was scared of the association with the Lewinsky scandal that most Americans couldn't care less about. Gore struggled with his image because before he was known as the guy who was really big into the environment and the internet, he was known as being very boring.
Reagan, Bush, Clinton...
Yeah?
I don't know.
Clinton was the fun one, then came the boring one.
They're all boring.
The Al Gore version of the Macarena. Would you like to see it again?
He struggled with the youth vote because his wife is Tipper Gore, who was one of the big faces of the Karens who said that rock and roll was corrupting the youth and making them violent and evil. Plus, for whatever reason, he decided to choose Joe Lieberman as his running mate, an old and conservative independent Democrat who would work better for a Republican ticket. Plus, he's one of the big faces about the violent video games are subversive and making kids evil thing. And that's before we even talk about Florida, because some jackass thought this was a good ballot. So it's pretty confusing which hole is which, so a lot of people thought that they were voting for Gore, but accidentally voted for Pat Buchanan. And a lot of places in Florida had completely different ballots for dumbass reasons. You're supposed to poke out this thing called a Chad for some reason, but sometimes they didn't poke all the way through, and it was this huge thing that even the Supreme Court had to wade in on. So Gore literally lost by one vote. So what if Gore had a little bit easier time, choosing a vice president more similar to him like Evan Bayer, or a better moderate like Bob Graham, who even Clinton tried selecting earlier? Or maybe he got divorced to Tipper earlier. Maybe the Florida recounts went through. Maybe one of the Supreme Courts were able to switch their vote. Or even if he still loses Florida, all he really would need to do is campaign a little bit better in New Hampshire, which was competitive for some reason. So after a lot of bullshit, Al Gore becomes the next president, and the first one born in D.C. Conservatives are pissed, and talk radio will be spewing nonsense about how the election was rigged, but not having the same infrastructure as 2020, they couldn't really do anything, so Bush has to concede. Gore, unlike Bush, who tried downplaying climate change, was very environmentalist since the 70s. So day one, Gore would give tax breaks to companies that apply and got more green energy, invest into electric cars and solar and wind, tried to join the Kyoto Protocol but probably would get struck down, expand medicine, not quite a Gore care but a progressive step forward, continued the Clinton administration's more funding for education, smaller classrooms more available, and expanding technology like computers to them. No Child Left Behind has never passed, so schools actually focus on teaching kids rather than just getting high scores so they can get money from the government. Thanks to Clinton, they actually had a government surplus, which Republicans in a 50-50 Congress would force them to do some tax cuts that Clinton wouldn't want to do. And of course, the elephant in the room, the 9/11 attacks, if the Florida thing is still distracting everyone, would still happen. Gore absolutely would still go to war with Afghanistan because 88% of Americans wanted to. Homeland Security is still founded, and the Patriot Act, even if Gore doesn't like it, will still get passed. But Guantanamo Bay is never founded, and Iraq never gets invaded, because neoconservative psychopaths aren't whispering in the ear of Gore, which saves trillions of dollars and thousands of lives, but also means Saddam Hussein is still in charge of Iraq until he either dies of old age or COVID, if he survives the Arab Spring. 2004, it's likely he wouldn't get reelected because of Afghanistan, but if he does, that means he's got 2 Supreme Court picks, so Samuel Alito and John Roberts are delayed. Sonia Sotomayor comes in early along with Merrick Garland. With a liberal majority on the court, this means stuff like Citizens United, which allowed corporations to spend unlimited amount of money on campaigns, never passed. Roe v. Wade is never overturned, and gay marriage is made legal earlier, probably under the next administration, John McCain and Condoleezza Rice, which would delay Obama to 2012, not being able to campaign on change and hope and change against the Iraq War. And Donald Trump will most likely not rise because we have better infrastructure with green energy, so he can't denounce it. Gore might still be seen as boring to the average person, but legacy-wise, he's a good continuation from the Clinton administration, as well as doing far more, and bringing America a decade early on technology and green energy. Even with the sore spot of Afghanistan, he would still be seen as a competent and good president. Scenario 4. John McCain was never going to be Barack Obama in any situation, because his message of change and hope and change really resonated with a generation who was sick of Bush's incompetence and just downright idiocracy. McCain originally wanted to go with Condoleezza Rice for his running mate, but he really did not want to be associated with that Bush administration. But he was still a Republican who voted pretty in line, so he was never going to leave that association. Plus, Sarah Palin made her own idiotic gaffes. Plus, McCain was a geriatric old man going up against a young, energetic African-American man. No matter how much, ironically, his own party with Clinton and Trump tried to make him look like the Muslim communist antichrist, McCain was playing on hard mode, and there's just no scenario where you could, okay, that's way more likely.
I thought I might try a strategy called the sad grandpa. That's where I get on TV and go, come on, Obama's going to have plenty of chances to be president. It's my turn.
So Hillary Clinton loses to John McCain, who was the first president born outside the continental U.S. in the Panama Canal Zone, and he becomes the oldest president at 72 years old. Also, he's the first Vietnam War veteran to become president and the first POW. Sarah Palin becomes the first female vice president in American history. McCain was known as the Maverick and would try to be partisan, so gets Joe Lieberman, his friend, as Secretary of State, and probably hire more women for cabinet positions. The 2008 financial crisis and the housing crisis would hit, and McCain would more cautiously approach dealing with them, which would lead to slower recovery. McCain was actually pro-green energy and gay marriage, but the political party he chose, he wasn't going to get too far, so he had to work with Democrats and probably still not get much through. He was very much a war hawk and increased actions in Afghanistan and Iraq, also sending aid to Georgia during Russia's invasion. And Tina Fey got to play Sarah Palin more, which is a win for everyone. Occupy Wall Street would hit even harder as the left-wing backlash to 12 years of Republican rule. The Tea Party movement would hit as a conservative reaction to McCain's centrism. McCain would definitely see them as too extreme and denounce them, while Sarah Palin would fully embrace them. McCain would definitely be a one-term president, being unable to really fix the problems of the Bush administration effectively enough. Plus, he's super old. Sarah Palin is young and very conservative, but wouldn't get a lot of energy from the Tea Party movement because woman. So Newt Gingrich would lose to Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders. McCain's legacy, he's personally seen as honorable and respectable in keeping the Republicans from going completely crazy, but he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and anyone could have struggled the same way he could have. But let me know what you thought down below, as well as hitting the like button and smashing the subscribe button if you're new.